The worst secrets aren't the ones you tell. They're the ones you bury so deep that they start to feel like part of your soul. I stood alone in the cemetery at 2:17 in the morning, my coat pulled tight against the October wind as cold rain drifted through the darkness like silver threads. The city lights glowed faintly beyond the hills, distant and blurred, but up here everything felt quiet. Forgotten. The kind of place people visited once and then spent years trying not to remember. My fingers trembled as I brushed fallen leaves from the polished granite headstone in front of me. The name carved into the stone had faded slightly with time, but I could still read every letter without looking. I had read them thousands of times. "I'm sorry," I whispered. My voice barely carried beyond my lips. "I still haven't told him." The rain tapped softly against my umbrella. Somewhere far away, a siren echoed through the sleeping city. But here, beside this grave, the world seemed to stop. I closed my eyes and remembered a promise made 15 years ago. A promise that had shaped every choice I had made since. A promise that had followed me into every room, every job, every relationship. Especially this one. Especially him. Damian Romano. Even thinking his name made my chest tighten. Most people in New York knew who he was. They knew the tailored suits, the luxury cars, the headlines, the influence. They saw power, control, confidence. What they didn't see was the man who quietly funded children's hospitals without putting his name on the donations. The man who remembered every employee's birthday. The man who carried loneliness behind his gray-blue eyes so carefully that almost nobody noticed it. Almost nobody except me. And that was the problem. Because the closer I got to him, the harder it became to live with the lie. I opened my eyes and stared at the headstone again. Rainwater shimmered across the engraved letters. "I never meant for it to happen this way," I said. "I thought I could keep my distance." Another lie. I had known exactly what I was doing the day I applied for the maid position at Romano Estate. I had memorized the address years before. I had rehearsed what I would say if I ever stood in front of him. But nothing prepared me for the reality of Damian Romano. Nothing prepared me for his kindness, or the way he looked at me lately, as if he sensed there was something hidden just beneath the surface. The church bell in the distance chimed 3 times. I glanced at my watch and exhaled slowly. My shift started in less than 4 hours. If I left now, I might still get some sleep. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small silver key attached to a worn leather chain. The only thing I had left from the night, everything changed. The key felt cold in my palm. Familiar. Dangerous. "Soon," I whispered to the grave. "He deserves the truth." A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rattling branches overhead. I slipped the key back into my pocket and turned toward the path leading down the hill. Behind me, the grave stood silent beneath the rain. Ahead of me waited Damian Romano. And neither of us knew that before this story ended, the secret I had protected for 15 years would change both our lives forever. By 7 o'clock that morning, Romano Estate looked exactly the way it always did. Perfect. The massive stone mansion sat on 20 acres overlooking the Hudson River, surrounded by manicured lawns and iron gates that seemed designed to keep the entire world away. Most people saw luxury when they looked at the estate. I saw memories. Dangerous ones. I parked my aging Honda near the staff entrance and walked inside carrying a tray of fresh linens. The familiar scent of polished wood and expensive coffee filled the air. Everything about this house felt controlled, organized, intentional. Everything except my heartbeat. "Morning, Emily," Martha called from the kitchen. She had worked here for nearly 20 years and somehow knew everything about everyone. "You look exhausted." "Could not sleep," I answered with a smile. It was not entirely a lie. Sleep had become difficult ever since Damian started paying attention to me. Martha handed me a list. Library, East Wing guest rooms, then Mr. Romano's office. My fingers tightened slightly around the paper. His office. I nodded and headed toward the grand staircase. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden patterns across the marble floors. Staff members moved quietly through the halls. Somewhere outside, landscapers worked near the fountain. It was just another ordinary morning. At least it should have been. An hour later, I stood alone inside the library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched toward the ceiling. Leather-bound books lined the walls. A fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace despite the cool autumn air. I dusted the shelves methodically until my eyes landed on a photograph resting near the far corner of the room. My breath caught. The silver frame looked exactly as it had years ago. Damien stood beside his father, both smiling at something outside the camera's view. I had seen the photograph before, more times than I could count. Still, the sight of it made my chest ache. My hand hovered near the frame before I forced myself to step back. That was when a voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. Interesting picture, isn't it? I spun around too quickly. Damien Romano stood in the doorway. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie. Morning sunlight caught the silver tones hidden in his gray-blue eyes. He looked relaxed, but there was something observant in his expression. Something careful. "I am sorry," I said. "I was dusting." "I know." His gaze shifted briefly toward the photograph before returning to me. Most people glance at that picture and move on. My pulse quickened. Maybe they should pay more attention. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Maybe. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just dangerous. Because every second he looked at me felt like 1 second closer to the truth. He studied me for a moment longer. "Emily." "Yes." "Have we met before?" The question hit harder than it should have. My throat suddenly felt dry. 15 years of secrets seemed to press against my ribs all at once. I forced a small laugh. "I do not think so." He nodded slowly, but something in his eyes told me he was not convinced. Then his phone rang. The moment broke. He glanced at the screen and stepped away. "Enjoy the rest of your morning." I watched him leave. Only after he disappeared around the corner did I realize my hands were trembling. Because for the first time, I was beginning to understand something terrifying. Damien Romano did not recognize me. Not yet. But somewhere deep inside, he remembered enough to start asking questions. The question followed me for the rest of the day like a shadow. Have we met before? For simple words. For words that had the power to unravel 15 years of carefully protected secrets. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered over the Hudson again, turning the sky into a blanket of gray. I was replacing fresh flowers in the East Wing when Martha appeared beside me carrying a stack of folded towels. "Mr. Romano seems distracted today," she said casually. My stomach tightened. Really? 3 meetings canceled. 2 phone calls ignored. That usually means he is thinking about something. She gave me a curious look. Or someone. Before I could answer, she disappeared down the hallway. I exhaled slowly and returned my attention to the flowers. But concentration had become impossible. Every room inside Romano Estate carried pieces of a history Damien did not remember. The grandfather clock in the main hall. The carved wooden staircase. The stained glass window overlooking the garden. They were details most people overlooked. I remembered every one of them. Just before sunset, Martha asked me to deliver a folder to Damien's study. The request seemed harmless. Yet the moment I stood outside the heavy oak door, my pulse began to race again. I knocked lightly. "Come in." His voice carried through the door. Calm. Controlled. I stepped inside. The study smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Books lined the walls. Rain tapped against the tall windows overlooking the river. Damien sat behind his desk reviewing documents. He looked up when I entered. "Emily." Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely dangerous. I handed him the folder. "Martha asked me to bring this." "Thank you." I turned to leave. "Wait." My hand froze on the doorknob. "Yes." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "How long have you worked here?" The question seemed innocent enough. 8 months. And before that, I kept my expression neutral. Various housekeeping jobs. His gaze remained fixed on me, observing, measuring. "You never talk about yourself." My heart skipped once. There is not much to talk about. A faint smile appeared. Everyone has a story. If only he knew. Silence stretched between us. Then a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room. A second later, thunder rolled across the estate. The lights flickered once, twice. Then everything went dark. The entire room disappeared into shadow. "Perfect timing," Damien muttered. I moved automatically, without thinking, without remembering that I was supposed to be careful. My feet carried me across the room, toward the antique cabinet beside the fireplace. I opened the lower drawer and pulled out the emergency lantern hidden inside. The soft light filled the study moments later. The realization hit me instantly. I had made a mistake. Damien was staring at me, not at the lantern, at me. "How did you know that was there?" The room suddenly felt smaller. My mouth went dry. The lantern trembled slightly in my hands. Because the truth was simple. The cabinet had always contained an emergency lantern. even 15 years ago, long before Emily Carter had ever existed. And judging by the expression in Damien Romano's eyes, he had just noticed something that made absolutely no sense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain continued tapping against the windows while the lantern cast soft golden light across the study. Damien remained seated behind the desk, his eyes fixed on me with a level of attention that made it difficult to breathe normally. I searched for an explanation. Something believable. Something simple. Unfortunately, the truth had always been easier than the lies. Martha mentioned it once, I said carefully. She likes to tell stories about the house. The excuse sounded weak even to me. Damien leaned back slightly. His expression remained calm, but I could see the questions forming behind his eyes. Interesting. The single word carried enough doubt to make my stomach tighten. I set the lantern on the corner of the desk. If there is nothing else, I should get back to work. His gaze lingered for another second before he nodded. Of course. I turned and walked toward the door, forcing myself not to rush. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. My hands were trembling again. The closer I came to Damien, the harder it became to maintain the life I had built around secrets. That night the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows throughout the estate, while rain swept across the grounds in silver waves. Most of the staff had already gone home. I stayed later than usual, helping Martha prepare guest rooms for visitors arriving later in the week. By 9:30, the mansion felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made every distant sound noticeable. As I crossed the second-floor corridor carrying fresh towels, I noticed a faint light coming from the library. Curiosity stopped me. Damien was inside. He sat alone near the fireplace, a glass of sparkling water untouched beside him. An open book rested in his hands, though it did not look like he was reading. He seemed lost in thought. The sight surprised me. Most people imagine powerful men spent their evenings surrounded by meetings and endless phone calls. Damien often preferred silence. Before I could continue walking, he looked up. Our eyes met through the partially open doorway. Emily. I stepped inside reluctantly. I did not mean to interrupt. You are not interrupting anything. He closed the book. Actually, I could use some company. The request caught me off guard. For a second, I forgot how to respond. Then I sat across from him near the fireplace. Warm light danced across the room. Outside, thunder rolled over the river. Inside, everything felt strangely peaceful. Do you ever feel like you are forgetting something important? He asked suddenly. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? He stared into the fire. Sometimes I see a place, hear a voice, remember a feeling, but when I try to reach it, it disappears. I remained very still. Maybe some memories come back when they are ready. A faint smile touched his face. That sounds like something my father used to say. The mention of his father made my chest ache. I lowered my eyes before he could notice. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped against the glass. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to forget the secret between us. Just for a moment. Just long enough to enjoy sitting beside the man who had no idea that the answers he was searching for had been standing in front of him all along. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog. Thick gray clouds drifted above the Hudson, turning the estate grounds into something that looked almost dreamlike. I spent most of the morning cleaning the West Wing, trying and failing to stop thinking about the conversation in the library. Damien had seemed different that night. Less guarded. More human. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything worse. Because every time I saw kindness in him, the weight of what I was hiding became harder to carry. Around noon, Martha handed me a list of tasks for the afternoon. The storage room beneath the old guest wing needs inventory. I nodded automatically. Then she added, Mr. Romano wants the antique collection cataloged before the charity event next month. My heart skipped. The antique collection was kept in a private section of the estate that few employees ever entered. I can handle it, I said. An hour later, I unlocked the storage room and stepped inside. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with decades of family history. Old paintings, crystal vases, leather-bound journals, forgotten pieces of another era. I moved slowly through the room, recording inventory numbers on a clipboard. Then I saw it. My breath stopped. Resting on the highest shelf was a small wooden box. Dark walnut, brass corners, intricate carvings along the lid. The same box I had not seen in 15 years. My pulse thundered in my ears. I climbed the ladder before I could stop myself. The moment my fingers touched the wood, memories flooded back. A warm summer afternoon. Laughter. A promise. A frightened little girl holding a silver key while someone knelt beside her and told her to keep it safe no matter what happened. My hands trembled. Slowly, I opened the box. Inside lay old photographs, faded letters, and a folded piece of paper yellowed by time. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Before I could unfold it, footsteps echoed outside the room. Panic rushed through me. I closed the lid and returned the box to the shelf just as the door opened. Damien stood in the doorway. For one terrifying second, neither of us moved. His eyes shifted from my face to the ladder, then to the top shelf. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. My mouth went dry. "Just inventory." He stepped inside. The room suddenly felt much smaller. "You seem nervous." "I am standing on a ladder." A faint smile appeared. "Fair point." He moved closer, glancing around the room. "My father spent hours down here when I was a kid." My chest tightened. "You were close to him?" The question escaped before I could stop it. His expression softened immediately. "Very." He looked toward the shelves. "Sometimes I worry I remember less than I should." The words settled heavily between us, because hidden inside that wooden box was a piece of his past. A piece connected directly to the silver key resting in my pocket. A piece that could explain everything. Damien looked back at me. "Funny thing." "What?" He folded his arms. "Lately I keep getting the feeling that every answer I have been searching for is somewhere inside this house." I forced myself to hold his gaze. But deep inside, fear began to grow. Because for the first time, he was closer to the truth than ever before. 3 days passed, but the feeling never left me. Damien was watching more carefully now, not in a threatening way, in a searching way, like someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. Every conversation seemed to carry a hidden question beneath it. Every glance lingered a little longer than before. By Friday afternoon, Romano Estate was preparing for a charity planning meeting. Staff moved through the halls arranging flowers, polishing silver, and preparing guest rooms. The mansion felt alive with activity. I welcomed the distraction. Keeping busy was easier than thinking about the wooden box. Easier than thinking about the letter hidden inside it. Easier than thinking about the silver key resting in my apartment drawer. Around 4 o'clock, Martha asked me to organize refreshments in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. Large windows wrapped around the space, filling it with soft autumn light. The trees beyond the glass blazed with shades of gold and crimson. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then the front door opened. A tall man stepped inside. He looked to be in his late 60s, dressed in an expensive charcoal coat. Silver hair, sharp blue eyes, the kind of face that suggested he noticed details other people missed. The moment he saw me, he stopped walking. My stomach dropped. I knew that face. Not personally, but from photographs, from memories, from stories I had spent years trying to forget. His expression changed instantly. Surprise, confusion, recognition. The tray nearly slipped from my hands. "Excuse me," he said quietly, moving closer. "Have we met before?" The question hit harder than Damien's had, because this man actually might remember. "I do not think so," I answered. My voice sounded distant, even to me. His eyes narrowed slightly. "That is strange." Before he could say anything else, Damien entered the room. "Richard." The older man turned. "Good to see you." They shook hands. Relief rushed through me so quickly that my knees felt weak. Richard Castellano, one of the oldest family friends the Romanos had. If anyone still remembered what happened 15 years ago, it would be him. Throughout the meeting, I stayed in the background serving coffee and refreshments. Yet several times I caught Richard looking at me. Each glance made my heartbeat quicken. When the guests finally began leaving, I slipped into the hallway hoping to avoid another conversation. I almost made it. "Emily." I froze. Richard stood near the entrance holding his coat. "Forgive me if this sounds odd." His expression remained thoughtful. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." The air seemed to leave my lungs. "Someone important?" I asked before I could stop myself. He studied me carefully. "Very." Before I could respond, Damien appeared at the end of the corridor. Richard looked between us, then smiled politely. Perhaps it is only my imagination. He adjusted his coat and walked toward the door. But just before leaving, he glanced back one final time. The look in his eyes told me everything. He had not imagined it. He remembered something. Maybe not enough to know the truth. Not yet, but enough to recognize a ghost from the past. And as I watched him disappear into the fading afternoon light, a terrifying realization settled over me. The secret I had protected for 15 years was beginning to wake up on its own. That night, I could not stop thinking about Richard Castellano's face. Recognition had flashed across it for only a second, but that second was enough. Enough to remind me that the past was not buried. It was waiting, patiently, quietly, and now it was beginning to find its way back into the light. Rain returned after midnight, tapping softly against my apartment windows. I sat at the small kitchen table staring at the silver key lying beside a cup of untouched tea. The worn leather chain looked older every year, more fragile, yet somehow it had survived everything, just like the secret attached to it. My phone buzzed suddenly. The sound startled me. Few people ever called. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. Hello. Silence greeted me. Not static. Not interference. Just silence. Then the line disconnected. A chill ran through me. I stared at the phone for several seconds before setting it down. Maybe it was nothing. A wrong number. A telemarketer. But deep down, I knew why my heart was racing. Because lately nothing felt accidental anymore. The next morning, Romano Estate buzzed with preparations for the upcoming charity gala. Florists arrived before sunrise. Delivery trucks lined the driveway. Staff moved through the halls carrying decorations and equipment. The entire mansion seemed to vibrate with anticipation. I spent the morning arranging guest suites. Around noon, Martha sent me to organize seating charts in the ballroom. The enormous room looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers reflected sunlight across polished floors. Fresh flowers lined every table. It felt like something from another world. I was reviewing place cards when Damien entered. He loosened his tie as he walked, clearly exhausted from meetings. Yet the moment he saw me, some of the tension left his expression. You have saved this event at least 3 times already, he said. I smiled despite myself. That seems exaggerated. Not really. He stepped closer, studying the seating chart. You notice problems before anyone else does. The compliment caught me off guard. I just pay attention. Exactly. For a second, neither of us looked away. Something warm settled between us. Comfortable. Familiar. Dangerous. Then Damien reached toward the table and picked up one of the place cards. You know, he said quietly, I keep trying to figure you out. My stomach tightened instantly. There is not much to figure out. He laughed softly. That is what makes it suspicious. Before I could respond, his assistant appeared at the ballroom entrance. Damien, your conference call starts in 5 minutes. He nodded but did not move immediately. Instead, he looked at me one more time. One day, Emily, I am going to get a real answer out of you. Then he walked away. I watched him disappear through the doorway. My chest felt strangely tight, because part of me wanted to tell him everything. The exhausting lies. The hidden memories. The reason I had come to Romano Estate in the first place. But another part remembered the promise made 15 years ago. A promise that could not be broken. Not yet. As I gathered the remaining place cards, something slipped from beneath one of the folders on the table. A folded piece of paper. I frowned and picked it up. There was no name. No signature. Only 6 words written in neat black ink. I know who you really are. The room suddenly felt very cold. For several seconds, I could only stare at the note. The ballroom buzzed with distant activity beyond the doors, but the words in my hand seemed to silence everything else. I know who you really are. 6 words. No signature. No explanation. Just enough to make my pulse race. I folded the paper quickly and slipped it into my pocket. Then I looked around the room. Tables. Flowers. Place cards. Empty chairs. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet suddenly I felt as if someone was watching. The sensation followed me through the rest of the afternoon. Every unfamiliar face made me nervous. Every passing glance felt significant. By early evening, guests had begun arriving for a small pre-gala reception. The estate filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft sound of music drifting through the hallways. I moved between rooms helping staff manage last-minute details while trying not to think about the note. Unfortunately, forgetting was impossible. Around 7 o'clock, I stepped outside onto the rear terrace for a moment of fresh air. The sun had already disappeared beyond the river. Hundreds of tiny lights illuminated the gardens below, reflecting off fountains and stone pathways. The cool autumn breeze helped steady my thoughts. At least for a moment. Beautiful view, isn't it? I turned. Richard Castellano stood near the railing. My stomach tightened immediately. It is. He smiled politely and looked toward the river. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed softly. You know, memory is a strange thing. My pulse quickened. How so? Sometimes you forget a face for years. Then one day you see it again, and suddenly everything feels familiar. The air seemed heavier. Richard remained calm, almost gentle, but every word felt deliberate. Has that happened to you? I asked. He nodded slowly. Recently. I looked away first. The river shimmered beneath the evening sky. Somewhere inside the mansion, a piano began playing. Richard folded his hands behind his back. 15 years ago, I knew a little girl. My breath caught. She was brave, smarter than most adults. Life was not particularly kind to her. I could barely breathe. What happened to her? He smiled sadly. That is the question, isn't it? Before I could answer, voices approached from inside. Richard glanced toward the doorway. The moment passed. Enjoy your evening, Emily. Then he walked away. I remained frozen beside the railing long after he disappeared. Because for the first time, someone had spoken directly to the past I had spent years hiding. Later that night, after most guests had left, I returned to my apartment exhausted. The silver key still rested inside my drawer. The anonymous note remained folded in my pocket. I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded it again. This time something slipped from between the folds. A photograph. My heart stopped. It was old. Faded. Taken many years ago. A young boy stood beside a smiling man near the front steps of Romano Estate. I recognized them instantly. Damien and his father. But that was not what made my hands tremble. Standing several feet behind them was a little girl with light brown hair. A little girl holding something silver around her neck. A little girl who looked exactly like me. I stared at the photograph until sunrise. The image was faded around the edges, its colors softened by time, but there was no mistake. The little girl standing behind Damien and his father was me. Not Emily Carter. Not the woman I had become. The frightened child I had spent 15 years trying to leave behind. My fingers traced the photograph carefully. There was something else. A shadow near the edge of the picture. Someone had been cropped out. I could see part of a sleeve, part of a hand. Whoever had sent the photograph wanted me to notice the girl. They wanted me to remember. Sleep never came. By morning, exhaustion settled behind my eyes, but fear kept me moving. I arrived at Romano Estate earlier than usual. The mansion was quiet. Mist rolled across the lawns while the first rays of sunlight reflected off the river. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful. Then I remembered the note. The photograph. Richard's words. And peace disappeared. I spent the morning avoiding everyone, especially Damien. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Around 11 o'clock, Martha asked me to bring several folders to the private office suite on the 3rd floor. I almost refused. Almost. But refusing would only draw attention. So I carried the folders upstairs and knocked. Come in. Damien sat near the windows reviewing documents. Sunlight illuminated the room behind him. He looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying questions he could not answer. These came from the event coordinator, I said. He accepted the folders, but did not immediately open them. Instead, he studied me. You look like you did not sleep. My heart skipped. Long night. Bad dreams. The question hit closer than he realized. Something like that. He nodded slowly. Then he surprised me. Would you have lunch with me? For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Lunch. The chef made enough food for 20 people. I hate eating alone. A faint smile appeared. Besides, every conversation with you feels like solving a mystery. My pulse quickened. I should have said no. Distance would have been smarter. Safer. Instead, I heard myself say yes. An hour later, we sat in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. Autumn leaves drifted through the air beyond the glass. The atmosphere felt surprisingly normal. We talked about books, travel, favorite places, simple things, safe things. For the first time in years, I almost forgot who I was supposed to be. Then Damien reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table. The world seemed to stop. It was another photograph, different from the one I had received, but taken during the same period. My stomach tightened instantly. Richard gave this to me yesterday, Damien said quietly. The photograph showed him as a child standing beside his father near the estate gardens. Several other people appeared in the background, including a little girl. My hands grew cold. Interesting picture, he continued. Richard says there was a family connected to us years ago. I forced myself to breathe normally. Really? The strange part is this. His gaze lifted to meet mine. The girl looks exactly like you. The room fell silent. Outside, leaves continued drifting through the sunlight. Inside, 15 years of secrets suddenly felt one question away from collapsing. For several seconds, I could not speak. The photograph remained between us on the table while sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the sunroom. Damien's expression was calm, but I could see the curiosity behind his eyes. He was watching every reaction, every breath, every hesitation. It is probably a coincidence, I said finally. The words sounded weak. Even I did not believe them. Damien glanced back at the photograph. That is what I told myself at first. My chest tightened. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I am not so sure. Silence settled between us. Outside, a breeze carried golden leaves across the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, water splashed softly in the fountain. Everything looked peaceful, yet I felt as though the ground beneath me was shifting. Damien picked up the photograph again. Richard told me the girl's family disappeared shortly after this was taken. My pulse quickened. Disappeared? He nodded. No one ever explained what happened. His gaze lifted to mine. Strange, right? I forced myself to remain calm. People move away. Sometimes. He leaned back slightly. But apparently my father spent years trying to find them. The air left my lungs. I looked away before he could notice. Because that part was true. I remembered it now. I remembered a kind man who refused to stop searching. A man who kept a promise long after everyone else gave up. Damien watched me carefully. You know something, don't you? The question landed softly, but it felt heavier than any accusation. My hands tightened beneath the table. No. It was the same lie I had been telling for 15 years. The same lie that grew harder every day. Before Damien could press further, his phone rang. The moment shattered. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I have to take this. Relief rushed through me so quickly that I almost felt guilty. He stood and stepped outside to answer the call. I remained in my chair staring at the photograph. Then I noticed something I had missed before. Written faintly along the bottom edge was a date. October 12th. 15 years ago. Exactly 1 week before everything changed. My stomach twisted. Because I remembered that day. I remembered laughter. Sunshine. The smell of fresh-cut grass. And a promise made beneath an old oak tree near the river. A promise connected to the silver key. Suddenly, another realization hit me. Whoever had sent the anonymous photograph knew details that almost no one should know. They knew where to find the picture. They knew my connection to it. They wanted me scared. Or maybe they wanted something else. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I pulled it out immediately. One new message. No number attached. No name. Just a single sentence. The letter is not safe anymore. Find the box before he does. I stared at the screen as ice spread through my veins. Because only 2 people should have known about the letter hidden inside the wooden box. One of them was me. The other had been dead for 15 years. For several long seconds, I could not move. The message remained on my screen while my mind struggled to process the impossible. The letter is not safe anymore. Find the box before he does. My hands trembled. The wooden box. The hidden letter. Those secrets belonged to another life. Another name. Another version of me that should have disappeared years ago. Yet somehow someone knew. Someone had been watching. Someone knew exactly what I had come to Romano Estate to find. I deleted the message immediately, but the words stayed with me. By the time Damien returned to the sunroom, I had forced my expression back under control. Everything okay? He asked. I nodded too quickly. Just work stuff. His eyes narrowed slightly. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. But for once, he let it go. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Every hallway felt different. Every room seemed to contain hidden eyes. By evening, the estate had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Staff left one by one. Guests were gone. Darkness spread across the grounds. Around 9 o'clock, I made my decision. If the letter was in danger, I could not wait any longer. I needed to retrieve it. I waited until most of the lights in the mansion were off before making my way toward the storage room beneath the old guest wing. The corridors felt unusually silent. My footsteps echoed softly against polished floors. When I finally reached the door, my pulse was racing. I unlocked it and slipped inside. Dust drifted through beams of moonlight filtering through a small window near the ceiling. The shelf stood exactly as I remembered. My eyes immediately found the wooden box resting on the highest shelf. Relief washed through me. It was still there. I climbed the ladder carefully and reached for it. The moment I opened the lid, my heart stopped. The photographs remained. The old papers remained. But the letter was gone. For several seconds, I simply stared. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. I searched the box again. Then again. Nothing. The folded letter had disappeared. Panic rose inside me. Someone had taken it. Someone had found the one piece of evidence that explained everything. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around so quickly I nearly lost my balance. Damien stood in the doorway. Moonlight outlined his silhouette against the darkness. His expression was unreadable. "I thought I might find you here," he said quietly. Fear crashed through me. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward slowly. "That is exactly what I was about to ask you." My throat tightened. The wooden box felt heavy in my hands. Damien glanced at it, then back at me. "Emily." His voice remained calm, but something had changed. "Who are you really?" The question hung between us. 15 years of secrets balanced on the edge of a single answer. And for the first time, I realized I might not be able to lie anymore. The storage room felt impossibly quiet. Dust drifted through pale moonlight while Damien's question remained suspended between us. "Who are you really?" For years, I had imagined this moment. I had rehearsed explanations, prepared answers, built entire walls around the truth. Yet standing there with the empty wooden box in my hands, none of those answers seemed to matter anymore. Damien stepped closer. Not angry, not hostile, just determined. "Emily." His voice softened. "Please." Something inside me finally broke. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to make lying feel impossible. I lowered my eyes. "My name is Emily Carter now." The word now hung heavily in the air. Damien noticed immediately. "Now." I nodded slowly. 15 years ago, I had a different name. Silence followed. I could hear my own heartbeat. "The girl in the photographs?" he asked quietly. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. "Yes." Damien stared at me. For a long moment, he said nothing. The realization moved across his face piece by piece. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, then something deeper. "You were here." It was not a question. "Yes." "You knew my father." My throat tightened. "He saved my life." The words finally existed outside my memories. Damien sat down heavily on an old wooden chair nearby. He looked stunned. Richard was right. I swallowed hard. "There are things you do not know." "Then tell me." I wanted to. More than anything, I wanted the lies to end. But before I could answer, another voice echoed from the doorway. "That might be difficult." Both of us turned. A man stood near the entrance. Elegant suit, silver hair, calm expression. Damien's face darkened instantly. "Uncle Victor." My stomach dropped. I recognized him from old photographs. Victor Romano, Damien's uncle, a man who rarely visited the estate. Yet somehow he looked completely unsurprised to find us there. His gaze shifted toward the empty box, then toward me. "I was wondering how long it would take before you found it." Cold fear spread through my chest. Damien stood immediately. "You took the letter." Victor smiled faintly. "Of course I did." The room seemed to shrink around us. Damien stared at him. "Why?" Victor folded his hands calmly. "Because some truths create more damage than protection." My pulse thundered. 15 years of questions suddenly pointed toward one person. Victor's eyes settled on me. "You were never supposed to come back." The words felt like a door opening inside my memory. Fragments I had buried for years rushed forward all at once. The warning, the promise, the hidden key, the reason my identity had been changed. Not because someone wanted to hide me from the world. Someone wanted to hide me from him. Damien looked between us. Understanding began forming in his eyes. "The letter," he said slowly. "It names you." For the first time, Victor's smile disappeared. And in that instant, Damien finally understood what I had known all along. I had never returned to Romano Estate to destroy his family. I had returned to protect it. The room remained silent after Damien's words. I had returned to protect his family, not destroy it. The truth settled over everything like the final piece of a puzzle that had been scattered for 15 years. Victor Romano stood motionless near the doorway. For the first time since he appeared, the confidence in his expression seemed uncertain. Damien did not look away from him. "My father knew," he said quietly. "That is why he protected her." Victor's silence was answer enough. I reached into my pocket slowly. My fingers closed around the silver key that had followed me through half a lifetime. The leather chain felt worn and familiar, the same way it had felt on the day everything changed. The letter was not the only thing he left behind, I said. Both men looked at me. My heart pounded as I held up the key. Moonlight reflected softly across the metal surface. Damien's eyes widened immediately. Recognition flashed across his face. Not from memory alone, from something deeper. Something that had waited years to be understood. I have seen that before, he whispered. Tears filled my eyes. Because your father gave it to me. The words carried all the weight of the years between then and now. Slowly, I told him everything. The promise beneath the oak tree. The hidden truth his father had discovered. The reason my identity had been changed. The reason I disappeared. The reason I returned. Not for revenge. Not for money. Not even for answers. I came back because a promise deserved to be honored. When I finished speaking, no one moved for several seconds. Then Damien stepped forward. His eyes glistened in the pale light. All this time, he said softly, "You carried this alone." I nodded. I thought it was the only way to keep everyone safe. His expression broke my heart. Not because he was angry, because he understood. At some point during the years I spent protecting the truth, I had forgotten something important. Some burdens were never meant to be carried alone. Weeks later, the truth finally came into the light. The missing letter was recovered. Old records were found. Questions that had lingered for years finally received answers. The shadows surrounding the past slowly disappeared. And with them, the fear that had shaped so much of my life. Autumn gave way to winter. Snow covered the grounds of Romano Estate. The river shimmered beneath pale morning sunlight. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. One cold December afternoon, Damien asked me to walk with him to the old oak tree overlooking the river. The same tree where a promise had once been made. Snow crunched beneath our boots as we crossed the grounds. The world looked quiet, clean, new. When we reached the tree, Damien stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me after all these years?" I laughed softly through tears. Probably a lie. Definitely a lie. His smile widened. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed a small velvet box. My breath caught instantly. "For 15 years, he said, you protected a promise." His voice grew softer. "Now I want to make one of my own." Snow drifted gently around us as he opened the box. The ring sparkled in the winter sunlight. I covered my mouth, unable to speak. Damien looked at me with the same certainty I had searched for my entire life. Stay. Just one word. Yet somehow it contained everything. Home. Trust. Forgiveness. Love. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I nodded. And in that moment, standing beneath the tree where the past had once divided our lives, I finally understood something the years had tried to teach me. The greatest secrets are not the ones that destroy us. They are the ones that lead us back to where we were always meant to belong.